Years ago in Cub Scouts. Middle of summer, our troop plans a week-long canoe trip. On the day of the trip, our leader gets called away for some family emergency and can't come. Our sub-leaders decide it would be best if we hire a local guide to help us. They find a local hunter who knows the river we want to go down, and he obliges. First few days are fine and he's really nice. One evening we make it to an islet. The shore has rocks and branches strewn all over. Further up where the woods begin there are odd branches almost arranged in what looks to be almost structured. Guide is a bit uneasy as he's never really seen something like this before. Spent evenings setting up, making a fire and playing games. Just before sunset from the wood we hear a terrifying screech. Almost like a howling but more guttural. Guide grabs his rifle and tells us to put out the fire. The sound is heard again, but this time much closer. Guide tells us to get the canoes ready just in case. He wanders into the woods and silence. We all stand there on the shore trying not to be too freaked out. Suddenly there's another screech and a gunshot is heard. The leaders guide us onto the canoe and stand in the water ready to cast off. We hear another shot. Another screech, this time more sustained. Guide comes running out of the woods and onto our boat. He yells, "We can't stay here, go go go." We cast off and go into the water. By this time it is dusk and too dark to see if anything is on the shore. Paddle for another hour till we find a place much further down the river.
Well, fuck me. What happened next?
Nothing really happened later in the days following, but we were def spooked. This is Northern Ontario and I have some family there. Years later when I went for a visit I recanted this story to some people and some weren't surprised. The guide in question, while experienced, was only 27 at the time and didn't know the woods as well as some of the other more senior guys, and a lot of them have stories of run-ins with whatever these were. Being watched in cabins, rocks thrown from seemingly nowhere, sometimes dogs mutilated after chasing these things. A lot of natives, indigenous people, tend to agree that it's probably Sasquatch and that it's true that they can be really territorial. Some people may laugh at this notion of an ape in the woods of Canada, and elsewhere, but I'm telling you my experience, and the experience of plenty others, that there is something weird in those woods. I've posted this story on here before. Shit was seriously weird as fuck and I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents still claim they don't ever remember it happening. Be a young boy in the early 90s. Family cookout in the summertime at my grandparents in upstate New York. Whole extended family is there, all aunts, uncles and cousins. Think it was Independence Day. Adults are talking, kids are running around playing, everyone is eating, great cookout. Early evening, maybe 5 or 6 p.m. I see him first, random haggard-looking dude approaching from the deep woods behind the house, stumbling up toward front yard where everyone is. Think WTF, as it's literally like 100 acres of woods in that direction. No way he could have come from there without walking for miles and miles and miles. Dudes is in stained ragged clothing, looks homeless and drunk as fuck. I'm the first to point him out. Dad sees him and immediately says, "Everyone in the house now." Women rush into the house with all us kids. Think my dad and uncles are going to fuck him up, but then they rush in with us and I distinctly remember Dad locking the door. They seemed honestly terrified. This was so weird because both my dad and uncle were cops, both like lieutenants at the time. They were both wearing handguns and could have had the entire police department there in a moment's notice if they wanted to. My other uncle was a former boxer and built like a brick shit house. My grandpa in those days was an auto mechanic and built bigger than all of them. Dude was seriously like 6 feet 6 inches, a solid 320 in just muscle. Remember watching out the window as this homeless bum with gray hair, maybe in his 60s, just stumbles around the picnic tables. Bum starts picking up burgers and hot dogs and taking a bite of each and setting them down. I was maybe 6 the time and I honestly was furious that my dad and uncles weren't doing anything. I remember at one point my mom asking my dad, "Aren't you going to do something?" Dad just kind of looked out the window, but did not act. Remember one of my uncles, the boxer, about to go out but my grandpa stopping him with just a look. Finally homeless dude straight up flipped the picnic table and sent all the food flying. Begins laughing maniacally. Finally he just kind of stumbles off down the road toward town. Years later I asked both parents about this as well as a cousin who was there, none of them remember it. Mom tries to tell me it was a dream but I remember this shit plain as day. Still no idea what happened that day. I found a story I really like that I've been looking for, so I'm going to post that before I move on. 2012. Does anyone remember that video of the family in Tallahassee who recorded this sound coming out of the sky? I actually live in that same area and I heard it too. Live alone in a small trailer. I'm at my table reading a book and eating dinner when I hear what sounds like the distant roar of a jet engine. We'd had some really bad storms, so I figured it was probably more thunder. Sound keeps getting louder. It's definitely getting closer. Run to the door and look out at the sky, thinking maybe a plane was going down. Fuckload of trees so I can't see much. The noise is almost deafening now. It's like there's a fucking jet engine right on top of my house. The sound is literally making my head throb. The only thing I've ever felt that was even close to this is that feeling you get when you manually force yourself to relax your entire body. It's like I'm fighting to stay conscious. Drop like a sack of potatoes in the doorway. I can't move. It's like the sound is pinning me to the ground. I throw up. This goes on for what feels like eons. The sound swells in intensity and changes over time. By the end it sounded much more like some piece of huge industrial machinery as opposed to an engine. Super bright flash of light out of nowhere. Sound instantly stops. I called 911 and they told me a lot of people had reported the same thing and that they're not sure what's going on. Also, when I went into my backyard the next day, squirrel is lying at the base of a big tree. Figure it must have been stunned by the sound and fell and broke its neck. Go up to get a better look. Nope.exe. Whatever killed that squirrel, it wasn't a fall. Its eyes were bulging almost completely out of its skull. Looks like it suffered some kind of massive brain hemorrhage. I remember the way my head throbbed when the sound was on top of my trailer. Consider myself lucky. 2005. Me and brother are in room on the floor. Late at night and our parents are asleep. We aren't supposed to be awake so the lights are off. We're just quietly talking to each other and messing around with some Legos or something. We're more or less whispering back and forth non-stop like kids do. Something suddenly crashes downstairs, probably the cat knocking something over. We both pause. But the whispering doesn't. We look at each other. We are definitely not doing it. Something behind my brother moves. I go to say something and I get a brief view of it as a car passes. What I can only describe as a mummy is lying under my brother's bed, looking at me. It's not a bandage type mummy, this thing looks like a body that's been left baking in the sun for decades. It has very big teeth. It is reaching for my brother. The whispering is the sound of its skin on the floor. I scream and jump up. Turn on the light. It's there for a split second, then it's gone. Brother thinks I'm crazy, he didn't see it. Never tell him about it. Shove a bunch of boxes and sleeping bags under his bed. Make up some shit about seeing a mouse under there, he doesn't question it. Never saw it again. I'm 25, and when I was a kid I lived in a small town in California. It's a very hilly area. There are a lot of landslides. About 20 years ago, the city got disaster funding after a really bad one that killed about 20 people, and they reinforced a lot of the hillsides and leveled over the areas where the dirt was too thick to clear, or something like that. I don't really know the specifics of how they did it. Many of these newly leveled and developable areas became apartment buildings. I lived in one of these with my family when I was a kid. Important to note, I had no idea that our apartment complex was built next to where a landslide was. I was about 6. I started having terrible recurring nightmares of something outside of my bedroom door. The dream was always the same. I'm in bed, on my side, looking at the closed door. Cars are going by, and it makes the door look like it's shaking. I can't move. And I know beyond a doubt that there is something on the other side of the door that wants to come in. That's the whole dream. It sounds dumb, but it was horrifying. One night, I wake up after having this dream. Still in that half-awake state where I don't know what's real and what I'm just thinking, if that makes sense. I go to get up and a car passes by. It makes the door look like it's shaking. I come to a complete, dead stop. Something is on the other side of the door. I peed myself. Something is scratching the bottom of the door. At this point it felt like I was no longer in control of my own body. I watched myself walk forward and open the door. I looked down. Something was on the floor. Something horrible, deformed, broken. A literal human pancake. There weren't legs anymore, just strings of flesh and muscle. The head was snapped back, resting between the shoulder blades. One eye had been destroyed by a rock. The other wept blood, but I could see it looking at me. I could hear the shattered bones in its flattened spine rumbling as it reached its battered, floppy arm up to scratch at my feet. Just before it touched me, I opened my mouth and screamed as loud as I could. My mom came sprinting out of her room and she saw it too. She started screaming, and as soon as she turned the light on, it was gone. Slept with them until we moved out a couple weeks later.